Just as directors are able to construct means of terror on the silver screen through visual means, musicians are able to perpetuate monstrosity and despair through foreboding choruses, eerie lyrics, and an understanding of dark context. If one agrees with the idea that artists are able to funnel personal experience into truly authentic work, then Nick Cave may be one of the most artistically authentic musicians of recent times. 20 years of heroin addiction, the death of 2 of his children in the last 10 years, losing his father as a teenager, as well as countless arrests score a tragic life, but one which has subsequently produced an array of beautiful art. Cave's 1996 album, Murder Ballads, and his 2016 piece, Skeleton Tree, offer insightful perspective to the relationship between love, loss, music, and mourning, and shine a light on multiple ways of depicting monstrosity in a musical landscape. According to Malm, the idea of death is Cave's specialist subject, and as such should be investigated as a means of grappling with death and grieving through sonic intervention. The former, Murder Ballads, spoils itself upon reciting its own title. As expected, it delves into the process, motives, and consequences of various crimes of passion, translating the gory and grotesque into a vast and barren soundscape. Cave's album recenters a number of sometimes centuries-old accounts of murder, lettering death and torture throughout the work. In total, according to Gary Walker, the album speaks of the death of 75 individuals. It is macabre and bleak, yet it is fascinating in its approach to the bounds of storytelling, shattering the typical conventions of mainstream music production. Characters across the piece are stabbed and shoved down wells, made to watch as their families are slaughtered, and on the curse of Millhaven alone, 20 children are added to the already dizzying body count. It's a monstrous thing, states Cave, when speaking of the piece, continuing, "I used to wake up in a panic about dying, but I don't anymore." It seems the album became a form of catharsis for Cave, a way of purging, or at least suppressing, uncertainty around death and his bubbling fascination with anti-establishment, anarchist beliefs stemming from his early childhood and time in post-punk band The Birthday Party. Newman writes, "Today, the album is still considered a reference point for Cave's work, and, indeed, for the wider genre of murder ballads that he was drawing on. Cave and Murder, then, have been definitively artistically linked." Cave himself, when speaking to Louis Theroux, detailed his artistic infatuation with violence in music, stating,
"I like to write songs that were violent. In those days, I just enjoyed the thrill of language being able to write about violent things in the same way as maybe a thriller writer likes to write about violent things too. I liked what violent language can do within a song, because it always sat slightly uncomfortably in a song, because songs seem to be, by their very nature, virtuous things, let's say. And so if they had a kind of dissonance or a violence within them, that was exciting to me at the time.
Murder Ballads is a deeply iconoclastic venture across the edges of what defines musical storytelling. Its shocking subject matter and disregard for status quo moulds it into an exemplar of representing monstrosity, regardless of medium, era, or prior reputation. Where Murder Ballad speaks on the isolating first-person perspective of being a killer, Skeleton Tree comes from vastly differing roots. As passingly alluded to earlier, Cave lost his 15-year-old child, Arthur, in 2015 after the boy fell off a cliff whilst high on LSD. The musician's earlier work has no issue marching up unabashedly to the doorstep of death, yet on Skeleton Tree, the same character becomes oppressive, suffocating, and overwhelmingly involved. As Pitchfork Stuart Berman words it, Nick Cave has always played with death, now he confronts it. This unfortunate event looms over the work, and though the death of Arthur Cave occurred after a significant chunk of the album had already been penned, it is almost inconceivable to try and separate the two from each other. The overwhelming sense of longing and grief emanates from line to line, and the album coalesces to address a new form of monstrosity in Cave's catalogue, the unrelenting monster of mourning. Whilst Murder Ballads revels in the finality of death, Skeleton Tree wallows in the uncertainty of whatever comes after. The album is sore, is swelling, and is aching with an inconsolable pain. And it is in this torment that Cave offers a candle of insight into what is a uniquely personal tragedy. In the conclusion of the penultimate track, Cave laments, "They told us our gods would outlive us, but they lied. This line is referencing the morbid event of a parent having to bury his or her child, a reversal of the traditional sequence of events. Cave himself wrote in September this year, "A parent should never have to bury their child. It makes no sense. It sits outside the natural order of things. Yet here we are, living within these ghastly vacuums left behind." A child is naturally positioned as a god in the world of the parent upon its birth, becoming a perpetual focus of praise and attention. Despite this expectation, Cave's experience of his son's death turns this ideal on its head, as he curses the world for feeding him a false reality. The line, "but they lied," conjures a feeling of betrayal, and adds to the sickening feeling of loss which is so pervasive throughout the album. Whilst Murder Ballads often romanticizes and entertains the pomp and circumstance of murder, Skeleton Tree is one reflective of a man who has been irreversibly scathed by death. Cave's 2016 release is somber and violently grizzled. Its edges are thrashed by persistent turbulence as the artist wails through an unbearable absence of kin. In 2018, Cave responded to a letter from a fan asking for advice on dealing with loss. The 62-year-old replied, quote, "It seems to me that if we love, we grieve. That's the deal, that's the pact. Grief and love are forever intertwined," end quote. Whilst this amplifies the value of love, the idea that we all must grieve is unsettling and itself can act as a form of a monster looming in the back of one's mind. It seems Nick Cave has become cosmically interlinked with death. Whether intentional or not, his catalogue constantly dances and flirts with the notion, either through an anecdotal, experimental lens on Murder Ballads, or through a series of aching ruminations on Skeleton Tree. A man who has lived perpetually under the scope of monstrosity, Cave's expansive body of work illustrates pain, fear, uncertainty and grief like no other, and offers itself as a valuable contribution to the study of the monstrous.
Hey, little train, we're jumping on the train that goes